So I'm Richard Smith. I'm from School Energy Efficiency. You can probably guess what I do. Now, I met Lee back in 2015 when I came as part of the Ashton Less CO2 schools programme. So that looked at energy efficiency in schools and how to help schools make them more efficient. So I've got to put my hand up. I'm a bit of a geek. So I came from an IT background and I like data. And I like looking at buildings in a different way to most people because I want to make them more efficient and more comfortable. That's what I do. So you may have seen me in your school doing an energy audit. So I think, Lee, I did about 30 schools from 2015 to probably a couple of years ago. I mean, I did some work last year and hopefully we'll do some more next year when we're allowed to go into schools, looking at the energy efficiency of your schools in Leicester. And I think I was also at the Leicester Conversation as well. With James Vaness, my partner. So he's like the motivational speaker he's rent-a-rant basically. And he would talk passionately about climate emergency, about his trips to Antarctica. He may make this at some point, hopefully, but he's been teaching maths to hard to reach teenagers. So he's probably whacked. So anyway, what I'm going to talk about is what does carbon net zero mean to your school? Okay. Now, here's the first contentious bit. I say net zero. Now, I'm going to talk later about leaving out net, but I'm going to challenge you. Could you really make your school carbon zero? If you could, that would be brilliant because that is our aim. But it might be really, really hard because you have stuff that comes to your school and you can't make that on your school site. So at some point, I think you're going to have to maybe invest in local community renewable energy, perhaps, or plant loads of trees, because it does take a lot of trees. So I'm going to call it net zero for now, and I'll explain that a little bit more. Okay, so moving on, let's look at some good news. Okay, so this is from the Climate Change Committee, and look at 1990, where we were in our household emissions. And don't forget, household emissions are the largest emissions in the UK. And it was pretty bad. By 2017, we did so much. Can you see though how aviation's gone up? Bit of a stickler, that one. And where we used to be heading for in 2050 is there. But now, of course, we've signed up with the climate emergency to zero emissions. And you can see how small it is in our households. Really very small. And aviation is still the biggest there. Yeah. Maybe we should stop flying as much. Anyway, that was some good news. And I hope I don't upset people when I talk about more of the detail, as may not be as good as it looks in that graph, but I'll get to that bit, don't worry. So, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a carbon trip around your school. So usually I take my thermal camera and monitors and things and go around with students and we investigate what happens in schools. And over the last 5-6 years, I've been working on this and I've done well over 100 energy audits now. This is how I see the world in a school. So you have your energy. That's obvious, isn't it? You know, that uses carbon. If you can actually look at live data at Carbon Grid, I think it is, and you can actually see what carbon's being used in the creation of electricity right now, which is quite useful. So all our schools and everything really that uses energy takes carbon. But catering, have you thought about how much your catering, your kitchen staff use? It's quite a lot. And then we look at staff and students. Actually, you guys, well, you use the energy, don't you? Because, you know, you switch on the lights, you switch on the computers. Do you switch them off? Maybe not. Do you touch the controls to make it warmer? Let's have a look at that as well. And transport. Now, that's transport that the school may have. You may be lucky enough to have a van that takes your students around the place and take buses to swimming and outward bound trips. But what about the transport of your parents? Now, I know you're all probably working on how you can minimize that, but you're in a city. And it's not that hard, actually, to try and stop people using their cars. But I was at a Wiltshire village school 2 weeks ago doing my first energy audit in 7 months, and they're in the middle of nowhere. The only way to get there is by transport. So it becomes harder. It's how we can think outside the box to help those guys out as well. Now, also, there's resources. There's stuff that we use. Now, can I just stop there? Because I listened to this really good podcast. It's actually from the BBC. What planet are we on? And looking at it, Liz Bonnen is the person who heads it up, and they came up with some really interesting data. And I'm purposely stopping here because it blew me away a little bit. Did you know the stuff we buy, so the stuff in work, at home, in schools, equates to 37% of our carbon emissions? 37%. That's quite frightening, isn't it? And in our homes, that equates to 20% of our carbon footprint. All the stuff that's around you. So just look now around you. Look at the stuff you're sitting on, the computer, your coffee mug, all of that, all the materials has got to be mined, it has to be processed, it has to be put together, it's got to be tested, it's got to be transported to you. All that takes carbon. So what else? Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a bit, but our country, we've gone down 41% on our carbon, do you know, since 1990, which is brilliant. The thing is, we calculate that based upon the carbon we make in this country. Now think about that. Think about everything that you look around now, the stuff that's around you. Now, is all that made in our country? No. So a lot of it is actually made abroad. Now, the government are working on the figures of the real carbon cost of what we consume. And it's more like 15%. That's quite shocking, isn't it? Now, the government, you would think, would want to promote that and say it's really important actually we think about all this other stuff. And in a way they would, because they do publish it on their website, but they don't shout about it because nobody else does. And that's the issue, because it's difficult to calculate in, say, China, where a lot of our goods come from, how much it costs for that carbon, you know, what it takes for their carbon. No one wants to talk about it. So, and we're not being held to account in our laws and any agreements at international level. So people don't want to talk about it. So really we should be moving to more of a circular economy and actually repairing things, repurposing things. But I better stop talking about resources, the stuff now, because I've got a few other things to talk about. So school buildings, obviously I love them, how they're used, the poor windows, how hot they get in the summer, maybe even the autumn and the spring. So what does that actually mean? Oops, I've gone the wrong way, everyone. So, okay, I'm going to talk about what you might actually do about these things very quickly. And they're just a few bubbles, okay, that are going to come up any second. Here we go. It's gone red in the middle. Okay, we want to phase out fossil fuels. That's pretty obvious. We're going to do that by 2050, but can we do it by 2030? Can you get renewables in your school quickly? Are there people that can help? Can you get your food more locally? Can we have more vegetarian meals in school? I sort of fell into vegetarianism, and I have been for about 20 odd years, mainly for health reasons, but wow, I'm actually helping on the carbon side too. Can we get low carbon clothes? Because it's amazing how much carbon it takes to make our clothes. Can we use public transport more often and actually walk to school? It's frightening how many people go by car to my son's school just up the road. Electric vehicles, of which I've got one, they're great and they're starting to go further, which is brilliant stuff. Okay, I've talked a lot about resources, so I won't stop there, but can you move to a mobile ICT solution? Get away from those big old stacks from my era. And when you refurbish schools, can you actually make them more comfortable places? Can you get rid of those single glazed windows? They're horrible, aren't they? But I think more of our problem in the future is, can we actually create some shading? Because it's going to be getting warmer over the coming decades, and we need to think about cooling much, much more. So I think it's going to be more of a problem than actually our heating. We want to make our schools more energy efficient. So that's in terms of control, making sure we can control our heating, our cooling, our light systems. And it's great that we're all going LED. That's brilliant. And if we go mobile ICT, electricity bill is going to come down. But can we actually convert over to a more energy efficient and actually carbon zero heating system? So really, this is one of my final slides. What can you be doing? The first two are pretty obvious. I'm sure you talked about it a lot in this 2-week program with Leicester. Have an eco team or something, some sort of coordinator, and give them time. I mean, we all want money in our schools. I'm a chair governor. I would love to have some more money, but actually staff need more time, and so do students, to actually organise stuff, do things. Use your energy data, and I know at Leicester you have some great data that you can use, what investigate it, because it's just numbers if you don't actually do something about it. So over the next 10 years, can you get solar panels, maybe add batteries to it, which would be really amazing? And can you decarbonize your heating? That's the big challenge we're looking at. Hopefully you're off oil and onto gas. That's really efficient. But in the next 10 years, can you actually get onto heat pumps perhaps? Biomass boiler, I don't particularly like them so much because not really neutral. But heat pumps is an idea. Hydrogen's coming, but how quickly? Not sure. But there is help around you. There's the council. There's people that are here on this webinar right now that are there to help. Finally, Let's Go Zero. Now, this is an Ashton campaign. So I work a lot with Ashton. So they look at innovation around energy and sustainable energy around the world. And they've been working with lots of other organizations about what we can do. So COP26 is a year away, and this is their campaign to try and lead schools into actually declaring to go zero by 2030. So if you think about it, we need to be able to say we want to be zero carbons straight up, but we need to take action. So we need to actually form an action plan to do something about it. And we actually need to ask for help. So that could be from the government. So it's a campaign to get schools together to tell the government. It's not Ashton telling them, it's you guys, the schools, telling the government, we need help to go zero. And so we need our suppliers to hear the message as well. So we need the industry, and we need parents and grandparents and the bigger school community to hear. And finally, these are the areas which we think is going to be hit within this campaign, because all of these, I know from my workshops through Less CO2, these are all areas that students care about a lot. And carbon is involved in every single one of these. And funny enough, they all tally up with that lovely diagram I had of my own, because that's what schools are. They're made up of these things. And they're all the organisations there that have stood up and said, we are backing this campaign. And we're looking to get something like 5,000 to 10,000 schools by this time next year to go to COP26 and tell everybody that's coming there, our students and our teachers and our staff want change. So what are you going to do about it? So that got launched on Monday at the Youth Climate Summit. And so sign up. Go to their website. Well, just put it in Google and sign up and start your actions. And I know you're already on the journey, but here's a campaign to actually bring it all together. Okay, I think I've taken a lot of time there. Sorry about that. Thanks very much. I'll give you back control. Is there any questions quickly, or leave it to the end?
I was going to ask one, and I don't know if Charlotte was going to get there before me.
Go ahead.
This might answer the question. With the Let's Go Zero, I know that there's an action plan tool coming out.
That's
right.
Do
you know when that will be launched? Because I've forgotten. Alex did tell me, but I've kind of forgotten.
I listened to Alex today doing her daily little presentation at the Youth Climate Summit, and it still is. It's coming soon. Mm-hmm. So I think if I ask her, she'll say it's soon. So I don't know. I will go and find out. And if I do, then I'll let you know so you can tell people. Mm-hmm. Now, there are abundance of action plans hanging around, from Less CO2 to this campaign to your own climate emergency. I think it'd be a good idea if you kind of pull it together so you don't have lots of action plans, and that you can actually work on it as students and staff together. So I'd go for one. Whether it's going to help having it online and manage it, I'll need to see it, just like you guys.
Okay, brilliant. Charlotte, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and that's great. It's coming soon. I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for it, for the action plans. It would be great. I don't know what they have in mind, but we've already started at our school, like thinking through all the areas and what to do. Is both something that's very detailed, making sure that we cover all areas, including procurement and things like that, because most carbon footprinting calculators and stuff just cover electricity and gas, which I know there's good reasons for that, but it's like how to do procurement. It's really important, but it's so complex. It would really be good to have some guidance on that. And then also to split it into, there's what I would do as an adult to really make sure the school has an impact, and there's what I would do to involve the kids in it. And not that they wouldn't be doing the real work, but there's like, it needs to be a simplified version that I can take with them, so they can do a tick list and, you know, the survey themselves. So a child-friendly version of it would be is exactly what I'm kind of looking for.
I'll pass that on, Charlotte, but I would be amazed, given that they've already identified those areas in that final slide, saying this is what we think you need to work on. I'd be amazed if the action plan didn't cover all of those areas.
Yeah, that's great. And
I'll try and get an inside track on, okay, can we make sure it does, and that they do have a child-friendly version of it?
Yeah, that would be that's great to hear. Yeah. There's one other question I wanted to ask. Is that okay, Lee?
Yeah, sure.
It's actually a little bit more towards Lee and Amy and Mark. It's just you were talking. So Richard was just talking about how you want to get schools to have renewable for their heating, like or not renewable, but like the air source heat pumps and things like that. My school just this summer had their boiler replaced, and I was so frustrated. It was like we had the boiler had broken, and it was time. And if I had known that was happening, but by the time I didn't know until I saw the workmen there, and I was like, did nobody look at alternatives? But what I don't know is whether maybe the council sort of impose that on the school, or if the school makes that decision, or does the council now have a policy and that one just got missed, of making sure that you get in there when the school needs it.
Yeah. I'll give you from my perspective, and Fiona might give a slightly different one depending on what I say. So at the moment we don't have a written policy in terms of what we are replacing for heating systems in schools. I suppose ultimately, currently, it kind of very much comes down to costs and what's in the budget that will cover that. In terms of what we are doing at the moment is, I say myself and a couple of colleagues in estates and buildings are applying for the public sector decarbonisation fund. That is looking at the moment of about 13 schools where we know the heat systems need replacing in the next sort of 2 years. So that will be fully funded through this public sector fund of either ground or air source heat pumps. Any buildings, including yourselves at your school, where we aren't going to replace the heating through this funding, we can apply for what's called a skills fund, which will give us that roadmap of how we replace all our buildings' heat systems with electrical systems, basically, so no gas.
Yeah.
The expectation is that funding will then become available that we can use to do those buildings. So I hear your frustration around last year new gas system, but anything that we put in this year onwards, we will be using this funding for kind of this 2-year period, and then in theory from onwards then there will be funding available nationally that we can access to replace any other schools and other buildings.
So we just kind of, we're like the last one to have that, but from now on things will get replaced with with renewables and things.
The other bit as part of the funding scheme is where we can, we're looking at the solar panels, the LEDs and the window replacements on all schools as well. So the way that this fund works is it very much focuses on heat replacement first, which is what we want, because that's where the biggest carbon savings will be. And then you work out the factors of it, and then you can include other things as well, like solar panels and things. But you have to do the heat system as a priority, because of the way that funding works. But the long-term plan is we have this roadmap for buildings, including all our local authority schools. I suppose where we don't necessarily have the influences with the academies, so we are working with them, but we can't control them. So there's a couple of academy groups in the city that we're working very closely with to do funding bids for this scheme, but for others there is that potential gap, I guess. But for local authority, which is about 53 schools, we're looking at that funding application basically.
That's great to hear that from now on we get better.
Did you want to add anything there, Fiona? Is there anything?
No, you summed that up really well. I think Charlotte, it's just been an unlucky sort of timing issue, and if the boiler breaks down and you haven't got the funding at that point, it's really hard, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, Charlotte, I think we're on the cusp of doing a lot of work in this area, but it's a £1 billion fund, but you're competing against the Ministry of Defence, the NHS, you're competing against every public body and government department. So it's going to be really hard. £1 billion would disappear just like that. But
Yeah.
there's going to be another 2 lots, apparently, of £1 billion funds, maybe slightly different. But I think what you'll find is councils will be looking towards developing plans of how to do it. So the skills fund you're talking about. So if not this time, then maybe in a year or two, when the next funding comes through, then they'll be ready with an application and they'll get it in and they'll get, many schools change. That's the dream, is that you'll get the Academy Trust would hopefully do the same, and then we'll be changing hundreds of schools around the country instantly. And we've got to do that, there's no way, but it's coming.
Yeah.
So you're just lucky.
I just think it needs, sorry, I know we have to cut soon. It's just, I think from the perspective when you're kind of lower down in the school, it's like, where did that decision get made? Like the council's declared, some people in the council have got that. It's like, at what point, because that's quite a big decision of, heating system and stuff. It's just, is everybody aware when they're thinking like, oh, we're about to spend this, have we considered the carbon emissions on this? And I know that is what the council's working on, but it's got to spread to every decision and high enough up, because it seems like maybe the school couldn't have made that.
It needs to be part of business as usual, as opposed to this is something different. We're not there yet, but I think we're getting there.
Cool.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll move on to you then, Charlotte, if that's okay next.
Okay,